Have you ever felt a kind of shame you couldn't name, a hunger you buried so deep it started haunting your dreams, not in the form of lust or fantasy, but in moments of self-rejection so quiet you didn't even realize you were disappearing? This isn't about pleasure, this is about power, the kind that gets stolen from you the moment your sexuality is turned into a secret. Carl Jung warned, what you do not bring into consciousness appears in your life as fate, and if your sexual truth remains buried, if your desire becomes a ghost you fear rather than a flame you respect, it won't vanish, it will mutate, it will twist itself into your relationships, your shame, your silence. It will chase you in the places you least expect, because it's not gone, it's just underground. And maybe that's exactly where you've been too, underground, in a psychological winter no one talks about, where your body becomes an enemy and your desire becomes a crime, not because it is, but because someone once told you it was. The truth is, your sexual shadow isn't just about what you want in bed, it's about who you were forced to stop being. It's about the moment you first learned that some parts of you were too much, too loud, too curious, too wild. So you turned those parts off. You survived by silence. And you did it well, didn't you? You adjusted, you got good at pretending, you played the roles, wore the masks, said the right things. But inside, somewhere deeper, you started to fracture. You felt it, didn't you? That quiet break. That feeling that no matter how much love you give, you're still not whole, because there's a part of you still trapped, in the moment you decided your sensuality was something to hide. You may not even think of yourself as repressed, but repression isn't always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. It's not just about what you deny, it's about what you abandon. That fleeting desire you talked yourself out of, that moment you wanted to be seen but chose invisibility instead. That fantasy you dismissed as wrong before you even understood what it meant. Jung didn't view sexuality as just physical drive. He saw it as psychic energy, as Eros, as a divine creative force that fuels your aliveness, your art, your very sense of identity. And when that force is repressed, when it's twisted into guilt, when it's buried beneath trauma or doctrine, it doesn't disappear, it leaks. You see it in your relationships, in the resentment, in the compulsive longing, in the way you chase people who don't value you, or numb yourself in the arms of someone you don't even desire. That's not love. That's the sexual shadow whispering through the cracks. It doesn't show up how you expect it to. It's not always about sex at all. It shows up in your powerlessness, in the way you shrink in rooms you were meant to expand in the way you apologize for existing, for feeling too deeply, for being too sensitive. That's not you. That's the part of you you locked away just to survive. But let's get honest. What happens when you keep that part buried? What happens when Eros becomes exile? You might feel empty. You might become numb, or worse, you might become haunted, not by ghosts, but by fantasies you don't understand, by cravings that don't match your values, by dreams that disturb more than they delight. This is what Jung meant when he said the shadow becomes fate. When you don't integrate the parts of you that were shamed, those parts don't die, they just become darker. They become compulsions, obsessions, secrets. You start to believe that your desire is dangerous, that wanting something or someone or even yourself fully is wrong, and so you starve yourself emotionally. You withhold pleasure, intimacy, connection, not because you don't want it, but because deep down you were taught you don't deserve it. You were conditioned to confuse pleasure with punishment, and now, even when love is offered, you doubt it, you push it away, or you mold yourself into whatever you think will make you lovable, desirable, but only in fragments. Never whole, never raw. But what if I told you the part of you you're most afraid to feel is the key to your freedom? Because the sexual shadow isn't a monster. It's a mirror, and the reflection it shows you is not your filth, it's your fire. It's the unclaimed energy that's been begging to be seen, not for exploitation, not for validation, but for integration. It wants to be known, not acted out unconsciously, not projected onto someone else, but honored, owned, brought into the light. Most people think the solution is to suppress it more, to double down on the guilt, to try and become even more pure, even more disciplined. But Jung would have told you the opposite. He'd have told you to get closer to it, to listen to it, to explore the fantasy without shame, to ask it what it wants, not in the way that leads to indulgence, but in the way that leads to wholeness. Because when you finally turn toward your sexual shadow, something begins to shift. You stop needing to control everything. You stop molding yourself for others. You stop betraying yourself to feel acceptable. And that is when power returns. Not the power to seduce or dominate, but the power to be fully alive, to feel without shame, to want without apology, to be connected to your own body, your own truth, your own sacred erotic self, without needing to hide behind performance or pretense. This isn't about becoming hypersexual. It's not about chasing pleasure for pleasure's sake. It's about becoming real, reclaimed, integrated, and from that place, desire no longer enslaves you, it empowers you. So now I'll ask you again, what are you still afraid to want? And who taught you that you had to be afraid at all? If you're still carrying that fear, it's not your fault. Most of us were never taught to approach our sexuality with reverence. We were taught to fear it, to sanitize it, to split it from our spirit, as if it couldn't coexist with love, integrity, or inner peace. But Jung saw through that illusion. He understood that sexuality isn't separate from our psyche, it's at its core. And when you exile something that essential, the rest of your life starts to distort around its absence. You begin to see patterns, broken intimacy, emotional avoidance, relationships that either consume you or leave you hollow. You confuse intensity with connection, you chase what wounds you, you abandon what nurtures you. And at the root of all of it is the shadow you were too ashamed to name, the one you inherited from a culture that made erotic energy taboo, a threat, a sin. So you buried it. Or it was buried for you, before you even knew the language to describe it. That's where this gets spiritual. Because when Jung talked about the shadow, he wasn't just talking about pathology. He was talking about soul. Your shadow holds the pieces of you that were exiled from love, and until you bring those pieces back, you will feel fractured, no matter how much healing you do. That includes the sexual parts of you, the curious parts, the parts that don't follow rules, that challenge norms, that feel alive not in theory but in touch, in experience, in ecstasy. And I don't just mean physical ecstasy, I mean the ecstasy of truth, of saying this is me without performance, of looking in the mirror and not flinching. That's the intimacy most people never get to feel, even in relationships, especially in relationships. Because when you haven't integrated your own sexual shadow, you start projecting it onto others. You fall in love with what you've disowned. You chase what you think will complete you. You give your power away to people who reflect the very hunger you're too afraid to face inside yourself. That's why it never feels enough. That's why no matter how much attention or affection you get, there's still a void. Because it's not about them. It's about the part of you that's still in hiding. The part that's scared of being judged, abandoned, or unloved if anyone ever truly saw who you were under the mask. But here's what Jung understood. The mask protects your image, but it costs you your soul. And the soul can't be tricked. It knows when you're pretending. It knows when your desire is being contorted into something smaller, safer, more palatable. It knows when your no is a disguised yes, and your yes is coming from fear instead of freedom. That's why the path to integration is never just about behavior. It's about honesty. Emotional honesty, sexual honesty, spiritual honesty. The kind that says, this is what I feel, this is what I want, this is what hurts, this is what I crave. Not because you have to act on every impulse, but because if you can't even name them, you're living in self-denial. and self-denial has consequences, you start resenting people who express what you've repressed. You start judging others, not because they're wrong, but because they're free in ways you haven't allowed yourself to be. That's projection, and it's one of the most powerful ways the sexual shadow moves through you without your awareness. So ask yourself, what behaviors trigger you in others? What desires do you dismiss as wrong, gross, or perverse? What if those reactions aren't about morality, but about mirrors? Mirrors showing you the very aspects of your own psyche that were never accepted, even by you. That doesn't mean every impulse is sacred, but it does mean every impulse has a message, and if you keep silencing those messages, you'll never reach the level of clarity, authenticity, or intimacy you were born to experience. Because integration isn't about becoming a slave to your desires, it's about no longer being afraid of them. It's about listening to what your Eros is trying to say, not with judgment, but with curiosity. That's where real transformation happens. When the shadow is no longer the enemy, but a guide. And that guide will lead you through uncomfortable places, memories you'd rather forget, fantasies you never dared to explore, emotional wounds tied to your body, your identity, your worth. But it's in those very places, those wounds, those longings, those internal conflicts, that the blueprint of your healing resides. That's the paradox Jung was pointing to. The gold is in the darkness. The cure is in the contamination. The medicine is in the shame. But you can't get there if you're still trying to be good. You can't get there if your goal is to be pure, perfect, untouched. That's not wholeness. That's spiritual bypassing, and it leads to more disconnection, not less. Because Eros doesn't respond to repression, it responds to respect. If you want to be whole, you have to be willing to see the parts of you that don't fit your image of who you think you're supposed to be. That's why this work is not for the faint of heart. It's not for those who want comfort over truth. It's for those ready to meet themselves in the places they've been taught to avoid. To confront the shadows that dance at the edge of their consciousness and say, I see you, I hear you, I won't run anymore. And once you do that, once you stop running, the energy that's been locked up in shame begins to move. You start to feel alive in ways that have nothing to do with sex and everything to do with authenticity. You find your voice, your fire, your boundaries, your softness. You begin to feel at home in your own body, not as an object to be judged, but as a vessel of sacred intelligence, a map of your history, a compass for your healing. And from that place, from that integration, everything begins to change. Your relationships deepen, your creativity expands, your nervous system settles. Because you're no longer fighting yourself, you're no longer splitting yourself in two, pretending by day, aching by night. You're whole. And wholeness isn't just psychological, it's erotic. It's the sensation of being unfragmented, of being one, of being free. Not everyone will understand this journey. Some will call it indulgent, others will call it dangerous. That's okay. They're speaking from their own shadow. What matters is that you know the truth now. That hiding doesn't protect you, it imprisons you. That shame doesn't keep you pure, it keeps you small. And that your sexual shadow, when faced with courage, becomes your greatest teacher. So the next time that old shame rises, I want you to pause. I want you to breathe. And I want you to ask, not how do I get rid of this, but what does this part of me need to say? What does it need to be forgiven for? What does it need to be loved through? Because maybe, just maybe, that part of you isn't your darkness after all. Maybe it's your light, hidden, waiting, and finally ready to be free. Now, let's go even deeper, because what most people don't understand is that your sexual shadow isn't isolated. It's connected to everything. It bleeds into how you relate to power, to trust, to vulnerability. If your sexuality was shamed early on, chances are you learn not just to suppress your desire, but to suppress your voice. You learn to stay quiet, to stay small, to avoid being too much, not just in bed, but in life. And that quiet doesn't go unnoticed by your psyche. It remembers every time you swallowed your truth, every time you felt something in your body and decided it was wrong, every time you were touched without reverence or looked at with judgment instead of love. Your nervous system recorded all of it, and now, even years later, your body still flinches at real intimacy. It still questions safety when someone sees you fully. That's not brokenness, that's unhealed memory. But here's the beautiful thing. Your body is also where healing begins. Your sexual shadow lives in your soma, in your tension, your posture, your breath, and the moment you start reconnecting with it, listening to it without trying to fix it or moralize it, you begin to rewire everything. You begin to soften. You begin to trust again. Not just others, but yourself, and that trust is the foundation of integration. Because for many of us, the shadow isn't just filled with desire, it's filled with confusion. You were never given a language for your sexual energy. You were told what not to do, who not to be, what was shameful or dirty or dangerous. But were you ever taught what was sacred, what was beautiful, what was yours? Probably not. So it's no surprise that now, as an adult, you feel split between repression and compulsion, between numbness and chaos. That's what happens when you're never shown how to meet desire with clarity and compassion. And this is where Jung's brilliance becomes vital. He didn't just say you have a shadow. He said your job is to integrate it. That means you don't eradicate your sexual longings. You don't pathologize your fantasies. You bring them into the light. You get curious. You explore their roots. You ask what need they're expressing, what part of you they belong to. Is it your inner child needing safety, your adolescent self needing expression, your adult self needing connection without conditions? Because every impulse, no matter how strange or uncomfortable, is a clue. It's a message from the unconscious. It doesn't mean you should act on everything, but it does mean you need to understand it. Because if you don't understand it, it runs your life from the shadows. That's what Jung meant by fate. You keep playing out the same dynamics, attracting unavailable people, sabotaging intimacy, feeling disconnected from your body, and it feels random, but it's not. It's patterned. It's the shadow speaking in code. So, how do you decode it? You start by slowing down, by noticing your reactions, especially the ones that seem out of proportion. You pay attention to the fantasies you judge, the memories you avoid, the parts of your story that still make you flinch, and instead of pushing them away, you ask them to speak. You journal, you breathe, you get into your body through movement, sound, stillness. You sit in the discomfort, not to punish yourself, but to become familiar with your own truth. This is not easy work. It's emotionally messy, it requires boundaries, it requires discernment. But it also requires surrender. Because you cannot control what you refuse to feel, and you cannot heal what you're still trying to suppress. The goal isn't to become someone else. The goal is to reclaim who you were before shame taught you to hide. And that's a revolutionary act. Especially in a world that's still deeply uncomfortable with sexuality, especially in a world that either commodifies Eros or demonizes it. You were never meant to fit into those boxes. You were never meant to be tamed into submission or sold as an object of consumption. Your sexual energy is not a marketing tool. It's not a performance. It's a spiritual current. It's life force. And when you reclaim it, you become magnetic, not because you're trying to be, but because authenticity radiates. People can feel when you're integrated. They can sense when you're no longer performing or pretending. You speak differently, you move differently, you love differently. And perhaps most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself. You stop outsourcing your worth to those who only see fragments of you. You stop negotiating your aliveness just to be accepted. You no longer beg for crumbs of affection because you've remembered your wholeness. You've re-inherited your fire, and that fire changes everything. That doesn't mean you become reckless or boundaryless. On the contrary, it means your boundaries become sacred. You start protecting your energy, your space, your sensuality, because it's no longer a tool to get love. It's an expression of the love you've already found inside yourself. You become sovereign, not above connection, but rooted in yourself enough to enter connection without disappearing. That's what the integration of the sexual shadow looks like. It's not a destination, it's a practice, a lifelong dialogue with your inner world, a willingness to keep returning to the parts of you that were never held, never understood, never allowed, and saying, I see you now, I won't run anymore. Because the truth is, the sexual shadow only controls you when you avoid it. But when you face it, when you sit with it, speak with it, honor it, it transforms. It becomes a source of wisdom, of creativity, of compassion. You begin to see that even your darkest longings were never meant to destroy you. They were trying to lead you back to the places where your soul was split. And now that you have arrived there, now that you're finally listening, you can begin the work of reuniting with yourself. You can begin the work of love. Not romantic love, soul love, the kind that doesn't need to be earned or proven or performed. The kind that says, I am already enough, as I am. Even with this shadow, especially with this shadow. Because this shadow is not a curse, it's a key to depth, to power, to wholeness, is truth. Now imagine what your life could look like if you stopped fighting this part of yourself, if you stopped splitting your identity into acceptable and forbidden. What would happen if you made room for all of you, the sacred and the sensual, the tender and the taboo? Most people never find out. They spend their lives editing themselves, filtering every word, every emotion, every impulse through a lens of fear, fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of being seen in their rawest form and being told you're too much. But what if that fear is rooted in a lie? What if your deepest aliveness, your most magnetic presence only emerges when you stop hiding? That's the invitation the sexual shadow offers. Not chaos, not indulgence, but wholeness. Yes, it can be disorienting. When you start to reclaim this energy, when you begin to feel your desire without shame, the world might not know what to do with you. People who were used to you being small, contained, agreeable, they might pull away, they might accuse you of changing. But that's not your problem to fix, that's their discomfort with your power. Because you're no longer performing, you're no longer offering a version of yourself that fits into their expectations. And that kind of authenticity can feel threatening to those still living in repression. But that discomfort is also a gift, because it reveals where your relationships were built on performance rather than presence. It shows you who is loving the mask and who's capable of loving the real you. And once you've tasted that kind of truth, you won't go back. You won't shrink yourself to make others feel comfortable. You won't silence your voice to protect someone else's illusion. Because you'll know what it costs. You'll have felt the ache of self-abandonment, and you'll never want to return to that cage. And yet, don't be surprised if old patterns try to pull you back. Repression is comfortable, familiar, even seductive, especially if you've spent most of your life equating control with safety. But real safety doesn't come from denial. It comes from integration. It comes from knowing that you can feel a deep desire, a primal hunger, and still stay grounded, still stay kind. That's what maturity looks like. That's what sexual sovereignty means. You're no longer a slave to your impulses, but you're not afraid of them either. That's the space where magic happens, where intimacy deepens, where your relationships stop revolving around performance and begin revolving around presence. You don't have to pretend anymore. You don't have to hide the parts of you that feel too intense or too wild. You bring them into the light. You name them, you hold them, you integrate them, and in doing so, you invite the other person to do the same. You create a space where authenticity is not just allowed, it's required. And let me be clear, this isn't just about sex, this is about life. Your sexual shadow is just one expression of your deeper vitality. The way you engage with it mirrors the way you engage with power, with truth, with vulnerability, with creativity. When you're disconnected from your erotic self, you're often disconnected from your purpose, your passion, your presence. You start living from your head, not your body, from fear, not intuition, and that's not living, it's surviving. But you were not born to survive, you were born to awaken, to create, to feel, to connect. And you can't do that if you're at war with your own inner world. That's why this work is so important. It's not just healing your relationship with sexuality, it's healing your relationship with yourself, with your worth, with your aliveness, with your soul. And yes, it's messy. Yes, it's uncomfortable. You'll face old wounds. You'll grieve for the years you spent hiding. You'll confront the moments you betrayed yourself just to be accepted. But underneath all of that pain is a deeper truth. A truth that says you were never too much. You were just too real for a world addicted to numbness. So give yourself permission to feel again, to want again, to breathe again. Let your body become your ally, not your battleground. Let your desire become your compass, not your curse. And let your shadow become your teacher, not your enemy. Because the shadow knows things the mind forgets. It knows what you've sacrificed to be seen as good. It knows how many times you've said yes when you meant no. How many times you've smiled while silently breaking. How many times you've contorted yourself into someone else's fantasy just to be chosen. But now you have a choice. You can keep repeating the pattern, or you can break it. You can start telling the truth, not just to others, but to yourself. You can start naming your desires without apology. You can start healing the wound that taught you love must come at the cost of your authenticity. Because that's the real trauma, isn't it? Not the desire itself, but the message that you had to suppress it to be lovable. That's the lie that breaks people. That's the belief that keeps you from ever feeling whole. But it's a lie. And the moment you stop believing it, you begin to heal, not just sexually, emotionally, spiritually, somatically. Because your shadow doesn't want to destroy you, it wants to be loved. It wants to be understood. It wants to be reintegrated into the story of who you are, not as an enemy, but as an essential part of your wholeness. That's what Jung was trying to teach. That the journey of individuation is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming real, becoming integrated, becoming whole. And wholeness is not found in the light alone. It's found in the places you were taught to hide. It's found in the parts of you that still carry shame, still carry silence, still carry the weight of being misunderstood. That's where the real work begins. And that's where your real power lives. So don't run from your sexual shadow. Don't bury it beneath spiritual platitudes or moral expectations. Meet it, sit with it, ask it what it's trying to show you, and then listen. Really listen, because within that shadow is a voice that has been waiting your entire life to be heard. That voice inside you, the one you've ignored, judged, feared, it's not trying to harm you. It's trying to bring you home. Home to your body, home to your truth, home to a version of you that doesn't need permission to exist fully. And when you finally listen to it, not through the lens of shame, but through the lens of curiosity, something breaks open. The walls begin to crumble. The guilt begins to dissolve. The identity you built on denial begins to reveal the self beneath the self. The raw, sacred, complex human who is no longer trying to be good, but real. And what you discover in that space is not filth, not corruption, not danger. It's vitality. It's the pulse of life itself. It's the realization that your sexual energy is not separate from your creativity, your compassion, your intuition. It is the same current. When repressed, it distorts. When honored, it heals, it inspires, it creates, it connects. This is what Jung meant when he said that the shadow holds the gold. Not because it feels good to look at, but because when you're brave enough to see it, it gives you back the parts of yourself that you thought were gone forever. And when those parts return, so does your power. Not the kind of power that dominates or manipulates, but the kind of power that radiates from deep within, the kind of presence that doesn't need to prove anything. You walk differently, you speak differently, you choose differently, not because you're trying to be someone new, but because you've remembered who you were before the shame set in, before the guilt, before the silence. You've remembered what it feels like to be unbroken. But integration doesn't mean perfection. You will still have triggers. You will still experience conflict, fear, self-doubt. That's not failure, that's feedback. It's your psyche showing you where more attention is needed, where another piece of your story is asking to be reclaimed. And the more you meet these moments with compassion instead of condemnation, the more fluid your growth becomes. You stop treating your shadow as a problem to fix and start seeing it as a rhythm to listen to, a language your unconscious speaks fluently, if only you'll stop interrupting it with judgment. And you begin to see the world differently too. You recognize how society projects its collective sexual shadow onto individuals through slut-shaming, hypersexualized media, puritanical laws, and spiritual communities that split Eros from enlightenment. You see how the culture punishes those who own their sensuality while secretly feeding on it in silence. You realize how deep the fear of embodied, authentic sexual energy runs, because it threatens the illusion, it disrupts control, it reminds people of their own disconnection. But rather than fighting that system with anger alone, you start to embody a new one. You become the walking permission slip, not by being loud or provocative, but by being fully alive, fully at ease in your own skin. That's the real revolution. Not demanding change from outside, but becoming the change from within. The more you integrate your sexual shadow, the less reactive you become. The less you need validation, the less you cling to roles or identities that don't serve you. You are not here to be acceptable, you are here to be whole. And whole people move differently. They love without possession. They speak without masks. They desire without addiction. They don't need to be chased or rescued or adored. They need only to be met, because they've already met themselves. Every part, even the parts that used to scare them, especially those parts. And this is where intimacy transforms, when two people have both done their shadow work, when neither is projecting their unmet needs or suppressed shame onto the other, something miraculous happens. There's space, there's clarity, there's depth. You stop trying to fix or rescue or perform. You start showing up as you are, and you allow them to do the same. That's when love becomes art. Not a script, not a transaction, not a safety net, but a sacred mirror that reflects your wholeness back to you. And even if you're not in relationship, that intimacy is still possible. In fact, it starts with you, with the way you speak to yourself, with the way you touch yourself, with the way you honor your own rhythms, your own needs, your own desires. Self-intimacy is not a consolation prize. It's the foundation. Because if you can't be honest with yourself about what you truly want, you will always betray yourself in the presence of others. You will shapeshift, you will over-explain, you will withhold, and in doing so you'll reinforce the very wounds you're trying to heal. But you don't have to keep living like that. You don't have to keep choosing safety over sovereignty. You can let yourself be seen, not just in the ways that are easy, but in the ways that are terrifying. That's where freedom lives, not behind your armor, but beyond it. So this is your invitation, to drop the mask, to feel the ache, to tell the truth, to stop hiding behind spiritual perfection or moral purity, to get messy, to get honest, to get real. Because the world doesn't need more good people afraid of their desire. It needs more whole people, unafraid to love from their full selves. Your sexual shadow is not the enemy. It is the doorway to depth, to healing, to soul. But only if you're willing to walk through it. Only if you're ready to stop apologizing for being alive, for wanting, for needing, for feeling. for knowing there is more to you than what you've been taught to be. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about sexuality, it's about your essence, your life force, your sacred, undomesticated truth. And when you reclaim that, when you no longer fear the fire within you, you become untouchable. Not because you're hard, but because you're whole. And when you're whole, everything begins to realign, not because you're forcing change, but because you've stopped betraying your center. The choices you make reflect who you truly are, not who you're trying to please. The people you attract mirror your authenticity, not your wounds. You stop looking for someone to complete you because you've reclaimed the parts of you that were scattered across years of silence, guilt, and forgetting. That is the miracle of integration. Not a life free from shadows, but a life where the shadow no longer runs the show. You see, the shadow is not a problem to solve. It is a relationship to tend. It is a dialogue that never really ends. And the sexual shadow, more than any other, is the one most people fear facing because it strikes at the roots of everything. How you see yourself, how you relate to power, how you define love. But it also holds the capacity to restore you to your deepest integrity, because when you claim this energy as your own, when you bring it out of hiding and let it breathe, it doesn't make you dangerous, it makes you embodied. That's what's been missing for so long. Embodiment. We live in a world that's addicted to mental narratives. We talk about healing, about empowerment, about self-love, but we rarely drop into our bodies long enough to feel what any of that actually means. And yet your body remembers everything. Every moment you were shamed, every time you were touched without safety, every instance you disconnected to survive, and it also remembers what it's like to be free, to dance, to desire, to exhale without fear. This is why true healing can never just be intellectual. It must be somatic. It must be lived. So when you begin to work with your sexual shadow, don't just think about it, feel it. Let your body be part of the process. Let it move, let it express, let it cry, shake, laugh, moan, breathe. This is not performance. This is not about seduction. This is about truth. The truth that your Eros is not separate from your wholeness. It's central to it. And the more you integrate it, the more you realize that everything you were afraid of is the very thing that was trying to liberate you all along. You start to recognize the difference between real pleasure and counterfeit highs. You stop chasing drama and start cultivating depth. You learn how to be with sensation, how to sit with longing without needing to discharge it, how to feel desire without instantly acting on it, how to explore the full spectrum of your erotic nature without collapsing into shame. That is mastery. Not control through suppression, but clarity through connection. And this changes how you love, it changes how you listen, it changes how you touch and are touched. Your intimacy becomes a ritual, not a transaction. Your presence becomes medicine. You stop needing to be impressive and start becoming intimate, not just with others, but with your own self. And that self, once fragmented and silenced, begins to speak again, begins to trust you, begins to show up with honesty, vulnerability. And yes, there will be moments when the old scripts come back, when you doubt, when you want to hide, when you wonder if you've gone too far, felt too much, opened too wide. That's okay. That's part of the spiral. Growth isn't linear, and integration doesn't mean perfection, it means returning. Returning to your truth, again and again, with more love each time, with more gentleness, with more power rooted not in dominance, but in groundedness. Because the truth is, your power was never in being liked. It was never in being chosen. It was never in how well you played the part. Your power has always lived in your capacity to be with yourself fully, to love the unlovable, to stand with the unacceptable, to hold the desire you were taught to deny and say, you belong here too. And when you do that, something in you shifts. Not overnight, not all at once. but gradually, in layers. You stop reacting from wounds and start responding from wholeness. You stop performing for affection and start offering presence. You stop clinging to people who reflect your shame and start choosing those who mirror your truth. You become someone who can sit in silence with your own fire and not flinch, someone who can witness another's desire and not project your own fear, someone who knows that their erotic energy isn't dirty or divine, but human, sacred, honest. And that honesty becomes your guide, your compass, your strength. Because when your shadow is no longer hidden, it stops needing to hijack your life. When it's seen, it softens. When it's loved, it integrates. And when it integrates, you become whole. Not by erasing your darkness, but by embracing it. That is what this journey is really about. Not sexual freedom in the way it's marketed to you, not endless pleasure or perfect connection, but sexual integrity, erotic wholeness, a rooted, embodied knowing that you no longer need to fear your own fire, that you can hold it, dance with it, channel it, love through it, and that no part of you needs to be exiled to feel worthy. To now, take a breath. Let this sink in. The part of you you were taught to be ashamed of might be the very part you need to reclaim in order to feel alive again. The sexual shadow is not your flaw. It is your unfinished story. And now, finally, you get to write the ending.